Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 20 of Buha's Block. Today, we are going to be discussing 3 lessons for the Lakers during their upcoming coaching search, and specifically 3 lessons from the Frank Vogel and Darvin Ham situations and how those ended and what LA can take from those tenures and apply moving forward in terms of lessons learned about what worked, what didn't work, and what to prioritize during this coaching search. So I want to preface this conversation with a couple of obvious caveats. Number one, of course, the Lakers need to prioritize a coach that is good with X's and O's, has smart schemes on both sides of the ball. They need to invest in a quality assistant coaching staff. They need a coach who's going to be a shrewd in-game manager with timeouts and challenges and substitutions, a coach with good lineups and rotations, a coach with some level of experience, though there is one candidate that I think is an exception, and a coach who makes effective and timely adjustments. Those are all prerequisites for being a good coach and for being a good hire. And those are all things that the Lakers are going to have to investigate and inquire about during this coaching process, from interviewing the coaches, from speaking to their references, or if they're currently on coaching staffs, speaking to the head coaches, the front office, etc. Those are all factors that are going to go into this process and be an important part of this process, right? So I want to clarify that those are all of like the basics and the fundamentals of being a really good coach. And on the flip side, for the Lakers to land a really good coach, they are going to have to come correct with the proper offer. And if it is a coach like a Mike Budenholzer, who is a championship level coach, the most decorated coach currently available, they're going to have to come with an 8-figure offer annually. And if Ty Lue becomes available and the situation with the Clippers doesn't work out, they're going to have to come with an 8-figure offer for him. Probably not for some of these top assistants that they're looking at, or maybe even a JJ Redick, though I think he could potentially command somewhere in that $7 to $10 million range, depending on how competitive the market becomes for him. But unlike the Frank Vogel coaching search, when the Lakers did not make the most competitive offers to Ty Lue and Monty Williams, who were their top 2 choices during that process, they're going to have to do that. If they want to land their preferred candidate, the Lakers are going to have to be aggressive with their offer to a head coach if they want to land the best. And I think that is the goal here, is to maximize the final year, 2 years, maybe even 3 years of the LeBron AD partnership. And the best way to do that is by landing whoever you deem the best coach, and whoever that person is not going to come cheap. And it's going to be probably the highest the Lakers have ever paid a coach, if not maybe just slightly under what they paid Phil Jackson back in the day. But coaching prices have gone up during the last few years. If you look at what Steve Kerr, Eric Spoelstra, Greg Popovich, Monty Williams, what these guys have gotten over the last 2-3 years, like the Lakers are going to have to make a competitive offer. And there isn't that type of coach available currently. Again, Ty Lue would be the one exception. So they don't have to get quite in that ballpark of like 12 to 18 million necessarily. But again, if it's going to be Bud, I think it's going to be 10 plus million. And any of these other high level assistants will be 5 plus million, and maybe even 7, 8. So really just depends on who they're ultimately going for and what that final price is. But I think the Lakers are going to have to learn from that Frank Vogel situation that they need to really invest in their coaches. And I do think that this pool is better than the Darvin Ham pool from a couple years ago. Not quite as good as the Frank Vogel pool, but the Lakers need to be willing to spend at or above market price for their upcoming coach and commit to them for at least 4 years, if not 5, again, depending on the candidate and how they envision that person growing with the franchise. With those caveats out of the way, the Lakers need to prioritize a coach who is good with schematics and X's and O's and adjustments, rotations, lineups, in-game management, has a good assistant coaching staff. Like that is the bare minimum for being a good coach. And those are all characteristics and skills that they need to weigh and evaluate in this next coach. But then two, to get that type of candidate and to land the coach that they're going to want, they also need to be prepared to pay them top dollar and commit to them for a long time. And really, I think keep that coach for at least 3 years, if not longer. Darvin Ham, I think, was a bit of an exception just because of how much his performance slipped in that second season, especially midway through, and just the disconnect within the team and within the locker room and some of the factors that I talked about in the last episode. But really, when looking at this is going to be the fourth coach in the LeBron era, and none of those guys have lasted longer than 3 years. I think the Lakers need to keep whoever they pick for at least 3 years. And obviously, they're going to sign them to a 4 or 5 year deal. But in terms of actual job security, that guy needs to be safe for at least 3 years, unless he just does a terrible job in year 1 or 2. But even then, it gets a little tricky because now you're potentially paying 3 coaches if you fire this coach and then hire another one. And now it's going to be potentially 5 coaches in the LeBron era. And there's just a lot there to navigate and handle. So I think the Lakers need to do their due diligence and find a coach who checks all those boxes I just mentioned, and also offer said coach a proper contract. And if they can do both of those things, I think they're going to land a quality coach. But I also think they need to learn from the Frank Vogel and Darvin Ham circumstances. And that is what we're talking about today. All right. So lesson number 1 is the Lakers need their coach aligned with both the front office and their team, specifically LeBron James and Anthony Davis. What I mean by that is I think the core identity of the team, the rotation, the lineups, the schematics, all the things we were talking about earlier need to be agreed upon with the head coach and the front office and the stakeholders, as Lakers Vice President of Basketball Operations and General Manager Rob Pelinka likes to refer to them as, in LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And if all 3 parties are on the same page, looking back at what has worked for this group over the last 5 years of the LeBron AD partnership, and figuring out, here are the pieces we want to retain, here are the pieces we might want to move, here are the pieces we certainly want to move on from, and here are the player archetypes that we would like to acquire via trade or in free agency or in the draft, etc. But I think all 3 parties need to do a better job of being aligned, having symmetry, and really just making sure that they're all moving in the same direction, and not just moving in the same direction from the initial point of the hire, but really throughout the tenure of the partnership, year 1, year 2, year 3. And I look at last season with Darvin Ham and him choosing to start Taurean Prince and have Taurean Prince and Cam Reddish have such big roles within the team, and that upsetting various players in the locker room, and at certain points, and including at one point, having Austin Reeves, D'Angelo Russell, and Rui Hachimura all benched. And those guys, of course, not being the same level of stakeholder as a LeBron James or an Anthony Davis. But Austin Reeves is someone the Lakers committed to for multiple years, and benching him 9 games into the season was not part of the offensive plan. D'Angelo Russell getting benched in December was not part of the offensive plan. Rui Hachimura was supposed to be a prominent part of the team, not a guy coming off the bench playing 14, 15, 18 minutes a night. He was supposed to be a 24 to 28 minute a night player at a minimum, even if he was coming off the bench. And as I've mentioned before, a big talking point for the Lakers was the continuity, and that was the front office's vision in terms of re-signing all those guys from the 2023 playoff run and committing to them for multiple years. And of course, with D'Lo, the plan was to trade him and to try and find a deal by the 2024 trade deadline. But there was also the scenario, which is how it played out, that they kept him. And then he had the option for this upcoming season. And he'll have that decision to make in the coming weeks. But they committed to Austin Reeves for multiple years. They committed to Rui Hachimura for multiple years. They extended Anthony Davis. They extended Jared Vanderbilt. They signed Gabe Vincent for multiple years so they didn't have to deal with a situation where he could potentially leave. And now they're trying to replace that Dennis Schroeder role. So the Lakers went pot committed to the core that helped them make the Western Conference Finals in 2023. And then their head coach abandoned that for large stretches of the 2023-24 season. Those decisions were not aligned with what the team felt, with what the locker room felt, the players felt, and they were not aligned with what the front office felt. So the new coach that the Lakers bring in needs to be aligned with what is the offseason plan and how we're building this roster, what is my input on that, and just making sure that there is symmetry and a shared vision of what this team should look like, and making sure that all parties are doing their part. The players are doing their part. They're performing to their capabilities and buying into the vision and what the coaching staff wants. The coaching staff is honoring how the front office built the team and making sure that, hey, like the leash for some of these guys who are better players, more expensive players, and parts of our core needs to be a little bit longer than some of these vet minimum guys. And of course, there's always an element of a meritocracy, and the best players should play regardless of contract size or length or whatever. But at the same time, those factors can't be overlooked, and playing minimum guys over guys you've signed for multiple years is really just going to upset those guys that you've signed for multiple years. It's going to alienate them, and it's going to get them to eventually not buy in. So I think there needs to be a more coherent vision overall and a more coherent alignment between front office, coaching staff, and the players. And there needs to be these discussions entering this hiring process in terms of this is the vision for next season, and we need to all be on the same page. Because I thought Darvin did a lot of good things X's and O wise in terms of the 5-out offense and the way that it clicked from January and February on. The Lakers were one of the best offenses in the league, but that didn't matter at that point because he had already alienated Austin and D'Lo and Rui and Vando by benching those guys and diminishing their roles. And there had already been a disconnect in the locker room, and the group had already started to tune him out. So they won in many ways in spite of the relationship, not because of it. And that ultimately was one of the primary reasons why Darvin Ham was let go. So I think for the next coach coming in, and again, this also ties in the front office and the players and everyone just talking through their vision, making sure they're on the same page, making certain compromises to be aligned. And once that alignment is there, continuing to check in, have open conversation, and figure out how can we remain aligned for the next few months, the next year, the next couple years. And there's always going to be some bumps in the road. There's always going to be some disagreements. There will be times where the coach disagrees with LeBron and it's a battle of wills. And like it's just naturally going to happen. There's never a perfect symmetry. There's never a perfect relationship. Like these things can get ugly and messy at various points. But I think looking at the way the Darvin Ham situation played out, particularly this past season, and then even looking at Frank Vogel and his final season of LA went away from the types of rosters that Frank Vogel has succeeded with. He's often succeeded with defensive-minded personnel, as you saw the championship season, even the second season, still having KCP and Caruso and Kuzma and a more defensive-minded group. And then going away from that and basically having LeBron, AD, and a bunch of young guys and a bunch of veterans. Remember, like over half that roster was out of the NBA by the next season. Guys like Avery Bradley and Trevor Ariza, Isaiah Thomas. I could go on and on. Like Dwight Howard was out of the league the next season. So just on and on down the list of those guys. Carmelo Anthony, like those guys were on their last legs, and that was not a Frank Vogel type roster. So I think remaining aligned is really going to be important moving forward. And I think it's going to be the key to a successful partnership with whichever coach the Lakers bring in next. Lesson number 2 is adaptability based on the roster personnel. And what I mean by that is it is important for a coach to have certain beliefs and certain principles and even a system, an offensive system, a defensive system, and just their general basketball philosophy. And it is important that the Lakers empower that to an extent. Now, the flip side of that, though, is you can't be so married to your beliefs and your principles and your systems that you stick to that over what is best for the team, what is best for the roster. And I think we saw that really again last season with Darvin Ham, and even at times during his first season, where his preference for 3-guard lineups and playing smaller and faster, prioritizing speed and skill over size and physicality, ultimately hurt the Lakers. And that was something that he took from his days in Atlanta and Milwaukee. It is also one of the reasons why I'm slightly skeptical of Mike Budenholzer being a good fit, despite being a championship level coach, despite being a coach who has been to the conference finals before, had a lot of regular season success. I look at some of his deficiencies as a coach, some of his stubbornness, and the lack of adjustments and the lack of adjusting to his specific roster or to a specific opponent. And that lack of adaptability ultimately being his downfall at certain points during his coaching career. And those very weaknesses playing out with Darvin Ham last year. And I think looking at how the Lakers were successful last year, it was often playing with a big front court. And in spite of that, there were several stretches in key moments of the season late where Darvin Ham continued to play Taurean Prince at the 4, play these 3-guard bench lineups that were not very effective. And a lot of times, even if those lineups were effective, it was like a neutral plus minus, or they were +2 or +4, where a lot of the bigger lineups had much better plus minuses throughout the season. And part of that was losing Christian Wood and losing Jared Vanderbilt for the second half of the year, but they were not playing a lot of Jackson Hayes next to Anthony Davis. They were not playing a lot of the Rui, LeBron, AD front court outside of the starting shifts and potentially the closing shift. So I think the coaching staff clearly could have done better in terms of maximizing the strengths of the roster. And the Lakers talked a lot about playing 2 big lineups, playing bigger. It was something that Darvin acknowledged at various points of the season in terms of the data supporting that. And yet that was not his proclivity. And that's okay, right? Like, everyone is entitled to their basketball philosophies and beliefs and whatnot, but then it has to work. And it did not work, especially against Denver. And looking at the conference finals when he started Dennis Schroeder and with a 3-guard lineup in game 1 of the conference finals, to again, various points of this past series where he went small in critical moments and it did not pan out. So I think there needs to be a better level of adaptability with this next coach. And that's where, this coach can have his core beliefs and principles and the scheme and the system and the X's and O's that they want to run. And on one hand, you want to empower that. But on the other hand, I think that coach needs a certain level of adaptability that Darvin Ham did not have, and that even Frank Vogel didn't have to a certain extent. Like, I think you can look back at Frank's playing certain players or playing certain pick and roll coverages that worked for the 2020 team or even the 2021 team that didn't necessarily work in 2022. And he was a bit slow to play Malik Monk and Austin Reeves more minutes and to reduce the minutes of Russell Westbrook. And that was a difficult situation for him. That was a difficult situation for Darvin Ham. But one thing that this coach needs, and which the Lakers need to prioritize during this search, is a level of adaptability, a level of flexibility with their schemes and their beliefs. And being a more modern coach who is willing to adapt to a series, to an opponent, and willing to adapt to their team, maybe not taking the identity that they wanted them to take and maybe shape-shifting a little bit into a new identity, but having the flexibility and the coaching acumen, the coaching awareness to realize that and adapt on the fly and make smart adjustments within that. So I think that is a really key thing here. And it does tie into the alignment and the symmetry that I talked about in lesson number 1 in terms of making sure everyone's on the same page in terms of the best way for the team to operate. But I think the Lakers need a coach who is adaptable, not a rigid, stubborn coach. I don't think that works as well in 2024. The list of really good coaches who coach like that is slim to none. Like off the top of my head, maybe Tom Thibodeau. Like every other coach has a level of adaptability within their rotation, within their style of play, within their identity. And I think the Lakers need to find a coach who is willing to embrace that style of coaching. And finally, the Lakers need a coach with gravitas. And this is where, if we are making the argument for JJ Redick, despite not having any NBA coaching experience as an assistant or a head coach, this I think is the biggest reason in support of JJ Redick. I think he has gravitas, but looking at Frank Vogel and Darvin Ham, we just had the report in The Athletic about Frank Vogel in Phoenix and players thinking he was a bit too nice and mild-mannered, and that when he would explode and yell at them, they were holding back their laughter and not taking it seriously. And you heard similar sentiments in LA, where Frank is just a nice guy and he coaches a certain way, but it doesn't always command the utmost respect and control of the locker room. And I think that was something that he struggled with, particularly in that third year as the team struggled and was not a play-in team. And you had a lot of egos and conflicting personalities, and he was not necessarily the right coach to navigate that. And to be clear, I said it at the time, like I did not think Frank Vogel should have been fired. It was largely for reasons that were out of his control. The primary one being the Lakers trying to figure out the Russell Westbrook situation, and the players starting to tune him out a bit toward the end of that third year. But I think Frank Vogel is a good coach. I think he did a good job in Phoenix, all things considered. We're now seeing how dominant and potentially special this Minnesota group is, with them taking a 2-0 lead over the Denver Nuggets and sweeping the Suns in round one. So I don't put that on Frank Vogel. I put that more on the roster construction and some of the players underperforming. I certainly think he is at fault to some extent, but I don't put that all on Frank Vogel. But the larger point here is you need someone who's going to command the locker room and hold players accountable, but also hold themselves accountable and have a level of awareness of when to throw themselves under the bus, but also when to call guys out. And I think that was an issue with Darvin Ham the last couple of years, where Darvin Ham did not believe, and he said this several times to us on and off the record, of he did not believe in throwing guys under the bus and calling them out publicly. He did do it on his way out, clearly, with his comment about a unnamed starter shitting the bed for Ted Gabe's, and that leading to that player being benched, and we still don't know who exactly that is. But for the most part, Darvin Ham was very hesitant to criticize his guys, which could be a positive, right? You're not going to upset anybody. You're not going to ruffle any feathers. But at the same time, that also applied to himself, where he never threw himself. I cannot remember a single time Darvin Ham threw himself under the bus. And an example of what I mean by this is, like, if you watch a Steve Kerr or a Ty Lue or an Eric Spoelstra press conference, some of the best coaches in the league, and I know Warriors fans might disagree with the Steve Kerr sentiment, but the dude's won multiple championships. He's one of the best coaches, one of the most accomplished coaches, even if he's maybe not pushed the right buttons over the last couple of years. That's an aside. But you look at those guys, they will throw themselves under the bus. They will fall on the sword publicly and say, like, I think of when the Clippers blew that 21-point fourth quarter lead against the Lakers, Ty Lue fell on the sword and he said, "This was on me. This was my fault." And Steve Kerr has done the same thing. Eric Spoelstra, like the best coaches in the league, know when it's time to fall on the sword. And Darvin Ham never did that. And even looking at that stretch when they lost 4 games in a row in early January, and Shams and I had the report about the disconnect in the locker room. He had one answer where he was like, yeah, I'm always reflecting on what I could do better and this and that. But it always came off as Darvin being insecure about his job security and thinking that if I throw myself under the bus, if I criticize myself, my coaching staff, if I criticize our starting lineups, which are getting off to slow starts, if I criticize my rotations and not playing player X over player Y, if I criticize my adjustments or lack thereof, that I'm going to lose my job. The Lakers are going to view me in a certain light, and I can't do that. It was almost like he was in job preservation mode for the whole time. And that's understandable to an extent. And there's a human element to it, right? There's a human aspect to it. But at the same time, if you're never taking the blame and never taking any accountability for why your team is struggling or losing games or whatever, and your answers for what can be improved upon or what you think went wrong is always players can play harder, players can more effort and energy, and it's about will and it's about work ethic, and you're not throwing anybody under the bus. You're not criticizing a player specifically, but you're criticizing at that point the whole team. And it's almost worse in some regards, of rather than saying player X didn't box out tonight, player Y could have done better defensive rotations, player Z could have moved the ball better, or player A was struggling, whatever the criticism is, or the adjustment, or the circumstance, like that's almost better than just always throwing all 15 guys under the bus and always saying it's an energy and an effort thing and calling guys out for that. Like, you can only do it so many times. And I look at a guy like Michael Malone. He'll have once a month, once every 6 to 8 weeks, he'll have the press conference where he lays into the Nuggets and he calls them out. And that carries weight, and it'll go viral. It'll go on Sports Center, and it'll lead the different debate shows of whatever. And like that is something that he is purposely doing. And sometimes you'll see coaches get ejected to kind of prove a point and light a fire under their team. But Darvin really struggled with that. And by the midway point of the season, guys started to tune him out because they didn't feel like he was taking accountability. And then behind the scenes, they didn't feel like he was commanding the locker room. So when I look at, again, the important qualities for this Lakers coach, X's and O's and scheme, and X's and O's and scheme are sort of interchangeable, but I think there's slight differences between, the X's and O's are more the details within your scheme. But your X's and O's, your scheme, your system, your adjustments, your experiences, your philosophies, your beliefs, like all these things are important for a coach, as well as your adaptability and your alignment with the front office and the players. But I also think you need to be able to command the room. And it's not just commanding the locker room. It is commanding the press conference. It is knowing what to say, how to say it, when to say certain things, when not to say certain things, how to frame things. And I think those were aspects of the coaching position that Darvin really struggled with, whether it was talking about adjustments, whether it was talking about injuries, whether it was, again, talking about things his players could do better, that he could do better. He struggled in those certain aspects, and he was a friendly guy. He was a nice guy. Same with Frank Vogel. I think Frank Vogel was better at navigating those things. A lot of times Frank was he was a bit more reticent. He didn't share as much as Darvin did. Darvin was a bit more personable. He was a bit more gregarious. He was more out there. He was more extroverted than Frank Vogel was. But he did struggle navigating and discussing some of these things. And Frank, it was less so, but I think more so just a personality thing where he was a nicer, more mild-mannered guy. And I think if we're making a case for a JJ Redick, I think that's a guy who does not put up with shit. And that is a guy who is competitive. He has a temper. And in some ways, I see shades of Steve Kerr with him, where in general, a nice, empathetic, friendly guy, a smart guy, but also a guy who, if you piss him off, he's going to get ejected. He's going to get a technical. He's going to lay into players. He's going to strategically criticize guys and strategically say things in the media to protect certain guys and push certain guys' buttons. And like, I just see him being a very smart coach in that sense. So that's not to say that JJ should be the favorite or that JJ will be the favorite. I'm just laying out, like, looking at some of the coaches. I don't know if Bud has that gravitas. Some of these assistants, we don't know them as well in terms of their personality or their command over a locker room. Kenny Atkinson struggled with that in Brooklyn. He didn't last a year with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Now, that was a toxic situation in Brooklyn. That was no KD that year because he was still recovering from his Achilles injury. Kyrie, that was probably the height or close to the height of the Kyrie drama and the off-court situations that he was going through and dealing with and all that stuff. So, like, I don't know if the Brooklyn situation is the best encapsulation of Kenny Atkinson's coaching and ability to command a locker room or command press conferences, but that is something to note, that he did have a star-studded group that he did not make it through a season with. And he has since coached the Clippers and the Warriors as an assistant and been around star-studded groups of Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Steph Curry, Draymond, Clay, etc. So he has that experience, and I'm sure he's learned from Ty Lue and Steve Kerr, two of the better coaches in the league. So Kenny Atkinson is probably in a better position now to handle that than he was in the 2019-20 season. But I still look at, of all the candidates that we've reported at The Athletic and some of the other candidates that have been reported elsewhere, JJ is the one guy that I think has, to quote himself, some shit to him and would not put up with certain things and would have, I think, the buy-in from LeBron and AD and know how to hold a proper press conference, know how to command a locker room, and know how to push certain buttons with certain guys. So again, there's a lot more to it than just that. But I think if we are evaluating all the candidates and what's important, those are qualities that I think JJ has that some of these other guys might not have, despite them being more accomplished, having more NBA experience. So that's a bit of an X factor for me and something that I think goes in the JJ column that I don't know if the other guys necessarily have. So to recap quickly, my 3 lessons from the Darvin Ham and Frank Vogel eras are: 1, the Lakers really need to prioritize alignment between the coaching staff, the front office, and the primary stakeholders. Of course, the stars, but even some of the key role players. Number 2, they need a coach who's adaptable to the roster and to different circumstances, and not a coach who's going to be solely married to their system and their beliefs. And 3, they need a coach with gravitas. They need a coach who can command a locker room, hold players accountable, not get ran over at times, and then also hold press conferences and hold their own in the press conference and say the right things at the right times and really figure out ways to not always win the press conference, but at least hold their own in the press conference. Those are just 3 lessons, 3 X factors that I think the Lakers need to learn from their last couple of coaches, the last couple of coaching tenures. And if they can nail those things, as well as what I mentioned earlier of, again, a smart coach who checks all the prerequisites of proper coaching beliefs and principles and experience and systems and X's and O's and all that, then also the Lakers offering a competitive salary, they do those 2 things, and then I think they nail these other 3 things, and they will find the right coach for the present and for the foreseeable future. But let me know if I didn't think of a certain quality or a characteristic in a coach. What do you think is important during this coaching search? Is it a more experienced guy? Is it someone who can command the locker room? Is it a certain scheme or basketball sensibility? Like if you are in Rob Pelinka and Jeannie Buss's shoes, what are you prioritizing? On YouTube, let me know in the comment section. On Twitter, let me know in the replies. But that'll do it for episode 20 of Buha's Block. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. For those on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and like this video and drop a comment if you enjoyed it. And for those listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I will likely be back on Friday. If not, I will certainly be back on Monday. Maybe I'll do a live stream on Friday if I don't end up doing a show. But so be on the lookout for that. I'll be posting, of course, on YouTube and on my social channels. So be on the lookout for that. But thank you again for watching and listening, and I will talk to you soon.